Once upon a time there were these guys who were trained by this guy, who invited this guy to the final exam of these guys. Only she passes, but he's only interested in these guys because he's evil and mistreated this guy when he was his apprentice, breaking his heart in half and creating this guy who actually looks like this guy, because when he was little, he shared his heart with this guy to save him. So this guy teams up with this guy in order to make these guys create this, so he can get his hands on this and possess him, since he's getting old. But this guy tries to stop all that. He fails and dies, and white hair possession takes place. But this girl won't stand for that and beats him into submission. But she then gets trapped in the realm of darkness after turning this into this, in order to save what's left of, and to hide and protect whose heart is sleeping inside of, to recover from the damage caused by making this. Meanwhile this guy wakes up with amnesia and is taken in by this guy who rules this place, and runs a lab with these guys, so he takes him in. Eventually they meet this guy, and becomes friends with this guy, who refuses to allow this guy to do dangerous experiments with the heart, so he teams up with these guys to banish this guy, and assume his identity, and accidentally split themselves in two and release these guys, who turn this place into this place, and start attacking other worlds, so this guy sets off on a quest to stop them. Meanwhile this guy, who's friends with these guys, and lives here, wants to travel to new places, but these guys destroy this place, and this guy manages to summon this, and fights them off only to find this guy, who destroys his home and causes him to be whisked off to this place, where he meets these guys, who are looking for this thing, so they can all use it to save the world and beat these things. But it's all a ploy by her, so that she can get one of these, and manipulates this guy to capture some princesses to do so. But this girl is the last one, and her heart is hiding in this guy, so he stabs himself with this in order to free her, turning himself into this, but accidentally releases this guy who looks like this guy, because that's what happens when you release a heart from its body. Meanwhile this guy finds this girl, and they hug and turn him back to normal. But this guy, who is half of this guy, who is claiming to be this guy, possesses this guy, and he and this guy fight in some really cool places, and then he turns into an airship, and they find one of these, which this guy doesn't fully comprehend and is annihilated by it. And then these guys appear in the door to the realm of darkness left by this thing. But this guy teams up with this guy, who seal the door, trapping themselves and restore all the worlds that these guys have devoured so far. But these guys end up here, which has been taken over by these guys, who are led by this guy, who is the other half of this guy, who captured this girl, who can alter people's memories of this guy. Meanwhile, these guys also end up here, and they proceed to wreak havoc among these guys, and in the end, only these guys are left. But because of what this girl did to this guy's memory, he has to spend a year in one of these, so she can fix everything. On the way out, these guys meet this guy, who's actually this guy, and guides them on their way to reviving this guy. But because this guy got released, this guy found him and is using his ability to wield this to make one of these for sinister purposes, under the promise of making these guys whole again. But this guy made this girl, who's a copy of the memories extracted by this girl, and is preventing her from completing her work on this guy, simply by existing. But she competes with this guy over the ability to use this. But they become friends with this guy, who's more or less in love with this guy. But as this girl comes closer to finishing, this girl becomes more unstable and eventually goes berserk and has to be killed by this guy, which causes the saddest cutscene in all of history, and nobody remembers her. But in the process, he gains the ability to use two of these things, and he sets off to destroy this thing. but is stopped by this guy, who needs to capture him so that this guy can wake up again. They fight and this guy cheats to win, but ends up looking like this guy because of it. So he works with this guy to keep this guy, who is this guy, but not this guy, in a virtual version of this place, to force him to recombine with this guy, so that he can go and save the world with these guys again, from these guys. But this guy gets in the way, and kidnaps this girl, and then this person is here for some reason with a new lackey, and they're still obsessing over these guys, which only helps this guy, since defeating them provides the raw materials for these things. So with some help from this guy, who used his half-life to protect these guys on the way to this place, so they can destroy this and rescue her, who has fused with this girl, because they're halves of each other, but from this guy, instead of from her, but not before he confesses his undying love for this guy, who's still stuck inside him, who then kills these guys, which doesn't matter to this guy, because all he wants is this, which gets destroyed by this guy, which traps him in the realm of darkness with this girl, and makes this guy look like normal again, so they go fight this guy, and win, and finally get to go back here. But not long after they get a letter from this guy, who has digitized their journals and uncovered the truth about these guys, and discovered from this guy that by defeating these guys, this guy is back. So these guys now seek training from this guy, so they can pass their exam and save these guys, and defeat this guy once and for all. And they'll play simple and clean a few times along the way.